The stench hits first. Then the rats. Sienna Ortiz moves through the South Side Chicago junkyard with practiced precision, her bare feet navigating broken glass and rusted metal like a dancer who knows every deadly step. At 12 years old, her world consists of survival mathematics. 3 aluminum cans equals $1. $5 buys Grandma Luz's heart medication for 2 days, and hope is a luxury she learned to abandon 3 winters ago. The August heat bakes the garbage into a nauseating perfume that clings to her secondhand clothes and tangled dark hair. She doesn't think about school starting next month, or the girls her age shopping for supplies. Her mind calculates only immediate necessities. Tonight's dinner, tomorrow's rent, the pharmacy bill growing like a tumor in Grandma Luz's worn purse. Each item she salvages from this wasteland is a small victory against the indifferent universe that placed her here. The sun descends, painting the trash heaps in shades of orange and shadow, warning her that darkness brings different predators than rats. Her foot connects with something solid but yielding, not the hard resistance of metal or the brittle crack of plastic, but human flesh. Sienna freezes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She's found dead bodies before. The junkyard is where Chicago's forgotten come to disappear forever. But when she looks down, forcing herself to assess what she's discovered, her breath catches violently in her throat. A man lies sprawled among the debris, dressed in a black suit so expensive it looks obscene against the filth. Blood mats his dark hair on one side, and his olive-skinned face bears bruises that suggest someone wanted him to suffer before they killed him. Except he's not dead. His chest rises and falls with shallow, labored breathing. A gold watch catches the dying sunlight on his wrist, probably worth more than everything Sienna has touched in her entire life. She should run. Every survival instinct screams at her to disappear before whoever dumped him returns to finish the job. But Grandma Luz's voice echoes in her memory, thick with her Colombian accent and unwavering moral clarity. Mija, we might be poor, but we're not heartless. We help when we can, or we're no better than the rich who step over us. Sienna crouches beside the stranger, her small hand trembling as she reaches for his neck to check for a pulse. The moment her fingers touch his skin, his eyes snap open. They are the color of storm clouds, gray and disoriented, filled with confusion and pain that makes him seem almost vulnerable despite his powerful build. He tries to sit up, and Sienna instinctively places her hand on his chest to stop him. "Don't move. You're hurt bad," she whispers urgently, scanning the junkyard for witnesses. The area remains mercifully empty, but night approaches fast. "Where am I?" His voice comes out rough, damaged, with an edge of something dangerous underneath despite his weakened state. "Who are you?" Sienna bites her lip, debating how much to tell this stranger who could be anyone, anything. "You're in the South Side junkyard, and you need to get up right now if you want to live," Sienna says, with an authority that doesn't match her small frame or young age. She pulls out a water bottle from her backpack, offering it to his cracked lips. He drinks desperately, some of the liquid running down his bruised jaw. When he tries to focus on her face, his eyes can't seem to lock onto anything, drifting like he's drunk or concussed or both. "I don't remember," he says, and terror creeps into his tone. "I don't remember anything. My name, how I got here, nothing." His hands come up to touch his head wound, and he winces at the contact. Blood still oozes slowly from the gash, and Sienna knows from experience that head injuries can kill you hours after they happen. She's seen it before in this neighborhood where hospitals are luxuries and ambulances don't come unless you can pay. "It doesn't matter right now," she insists, tugging at his arm with all her strength. "You can't stay here. If you're already hooked by this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. This journey is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next." The man struggles to his feet with Sienna's help, swaying dangerously when he finally stands upright. He's massive compared to her, probably 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that speak of violence and power, even in his weakened state. She positions herself under his arm, becoming a human crutch that can barely support a fraction of his weight. They begin moving through the junkyard, Sienna guiding them along paths only she knows, avoiding the main routes where the gangs do business after dark. Every few steps, the man stumbles, and she has to brace herself to keep him from collapsing entirely. His breathing grows more labored with each yard they cover, and she can feel heat radiating from his body that suggests fever might be setting in. "What's your name?" he asks between gasps, needing something to focus on besides the pain radiating through his skull. "Sienna," she replies without looking at him, her eyes scanning constantly for threats. "Thank you, Sienna." His gratitude sounds genuine, raw, nothing like the fake politeness she sometimes hears from the social workers who visit their neighborhood with clipboards and empty promises. They emerge from the junkyard into the street as darkness completes its takeover of the sky. Sienna's neighborhood spreads before them, a collection of broken dreams and stubborn survival. Small houses lean against each other like exhausted fighters, their paint peeling and windows covered with bars that can't keep out the real dangers. Dogs bark warnings as they pass, and she notices curtains moving as neighbors witness her bringing home a stranger who clearly doesn't belong. She quickens their pace, feeling the man's weight becoming unbearable on her shoulders but refusing to stop. Grandma Luce will be angry. They have almost no food, and bringing home a man who might be a criminal or a target puts them both at risk. But leaving him would make Sienna something she refuses to become. The walk takes 15 minutes that feel like hours. Finally, their house appears at the end of a dead-end alley, a small structure built from mismatched materials that somehow holds together through sheer determination. Warm light glows through the cracks in the wooden door, promising safety that might be temporary. Sienna pushes the door open carefully, announcing their arrival. "Abuela, it's me. I brought someone who needs help." Luz sits in her chair mending clothes, the television playing a Spanish telenovela in the background. When she looks up and sees the man leaning on her granddaughter, her weathered face transforms through shock, fear, and resignation in rapid succession. At 68 years old, Luz Ortiz has survived poverty, immigration, the death of her daughter, and raising a grandchild alone. But the sight of this obviously wealthy, obviously dangerous man in her home tests even her considerable strength. "Sienna Maria Ortiz, what have you done?" Luz demands in Spanish, standing with difficulty, her arthritic joints protesting. The man collapses onto their threadbare sofa before anyone can stop him, his eyes closing as consciousness threatens to leave him again. Luz approaches, her experienced hands already reaching for clean rags despite her words of protest. She examines his head wound with gentle efficiency, noting the quality of his suit fabric, the expensive watch, the manicured nails now broken and dirty. "I found him in the junkyard, Abuela. He was dying. I couldn't leave him there," Sienna explains, her voice pleading for understanding. Luz sighs deeply, the sound carrying decades of hard decisions and impossible choices. "We barely have food for ourselves, mija. And now you bring a man who might have killers looking for him? This isn't kindness. This is madness." But even as she speaks, Luz is already heating water on their small stove, preparing to clean the stranger's wounds. It's the contradiction that defines her. Harsh words protecting a soft heart that refuses to harden completely, despite everything life has thrown at her. The man opens his eyes again, watching Luz approach with the steaming water and clean cloth. "I'll pay you back," he promises weakly. "When I remember who I am, I'll repay everything." Luz laughs, a dry, bitter sound. "The promises of rich men are worth nothing here, senor. But you look like you have many problems, maybe more than money can solve." She begins cleaning the wound with practiced movements, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. Sienna sits on the floor near the sofa, studying the stranger with open curiosity. His hands are smooth, bearing none of the calluses that mark her grandmother's palms or her own fingertips. Whatever he did, before landing in that junkyard, it wasn't manual labor. His face, despite the bruises and blood, is handsome in a severe way that suggests he's used to getting what he wants through intimidation as much as charm. She wonders what kind of life he lived, what choices brought him to her world. "Are you hungry?" Sienna asks, breaking the heavy silence. The man nods slightly, and his stomach growls audibly, as if confirming his answer. Luce serves 3 plates with beans and rice, portioning the food carefully to make it stretch. She gives the largest portion to their guest, an automatic hospitality that overrides her practical concerns. They eat without speaking, the only sounds coming from the television and the occasional car passing outside. The man eats like someone discovering food for the first time, savoring each bite with an intensity that suggests he understands its value. After dinner, Luce points to the sofa. "You sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we figure out what to do with you." She provides a worn blanket that smells of lavender detergent and turns off the main light. Sienna says goodnight with a shy smile, disappearing behind a curtain that separates her sleeping area from the living room. The man lies alone in the darkness, trying desperately to remember anything about himself. He forces his mind to produce a name, a face, a memory of home, but finds only terrifying emptiness. His fingers touch the watch on his wrist, exploring it for clues. When he accidentally presses a small button on the side, a woman's recorded voice emerges, cold and elegant. "To Dante, my husband, my love, my king." The name Dante echoes in his head, feeling both foreign and familiar. But the word husband and that woman's voice create a sensation in his chest that feels wrong, poisoned somehow. He is Dante. But who is the woman who calls him king? And if she loves him, why did he end up thrown away like garbage in a South Side junkyard? The questions circle his broken mind like vultures, preventing sleep despite his body's desperate need for rest. He looks toward the curtain where Sienna sleeps and feels an overwhelming sense of debt to this child who saved his life without asking for anything. Whatever he was before, whoever he becomes when memory returns, he swears silently that he will protect her. With that oath made to the darkness, the man who believes his name is Dante finally surrenders to exhausted sleep. Outside, Chicago's night continues its violent business, indifferent to the strange salvation that just occurred in a forgotten house at the end of a dead-end alley. The moon hangs low and heavy, casting silver light across the junkyard where Dante's old life ended and his new one began without permission or preparation. Somewhere in the city, people are looking for him, not to save him, but to ensure he stays disappeared forever. But for now, in this moment, he's safe in the care of strangers who possess nothing except the wealth that money cannot buy. The cycle has begun. Betrayal, survival, redemption, justice. All the pieces are moving into position for a story that will change everyone it touches. Morning arrives with harsh sunlight cutting through the cracks in the walls. Dante wakes disoriented, taking several seconds to remember where he is and why every muscle in his body screams in protest. He sits up slowly on the sofa, noticing that Luce is already awake and moving around the tiny kitchen space, preparing coffee that smells of earth and spices. Sienna appears moments later, her dark hair still messy from sleep, but her eyes bright with curious energy. "Buenos dias, Dante," she says naturally, testing the name he discovered last night. Luce turns from the stove, holding a chipped cup filled with steaming black coffee. "So that's your name?" she asks, bringing him the cup with a brusque kindness that seems to be her default mode. "I think so. The watch said it," Dante replies, feeling ridiculous basing his entire identity on a recorded message. He sips the coffee gratefully, the bitter heat helping him focus. Luce sits across from him in her chair, arms crossed over her chest in a posture of judgment. "Listen, Dante, we can't keep you here long. People talk in this neighborhood, and I won't risk problems for Sienna." Dante nods, understanding completely and feeling guilty for being a burden. I understand, Signora. I'll try to leave today. I just need directions to downtown. He attempts to stand, but the moment he puts weight on his legs, dizziness overwhelms him, and he collapses back onto the sofa. The room spins violently, and nausea rises in his throat. Les clucks her tongue disapprovingly and approaches to place a cool hand on his forehead. You're burning up. That wound could be infected, and you're weak as a kitten. You're not going anywhere like this, or you'll die in the street. Sienna watches the exchange with pleading eyes, silently begging her grandmother to let him stay. Can he help us, Abuela? Around the house or in the garden. That way he earns his keep. Dante looks at his smooth, uncalloused hands and then at the two women who are debating his fate. Something shifts inside him, a determination growing from the emptiness where his memories should be. I'll do whatever you need. I don't want to be dead weight. I'll learn to do anything you require. Lou stares at him for what feels like an eternity, her dark eyes searching his face for signs of deception or danger. Finally, she sighs, a sound of resignation mixed with cautious acceptance. Fine. You stay a few more days, but you work for your food and shelter. No exceptions. She points toward a small door leading to the backyard. That day becomes Dante's introduction to a world he never knew existed. He learns that poverty is a full-time job, requiring constant effort and creative problem-solving. Luce teaches him to draw water from the outdoor pump, a task that leaves his arms shaking and his hands blistered within minutes. Sienna laughs kindly at his struggle, showing him techniques to make the work easier and prevent back injury. You grip it wrong. Watch me, she instructs patiently, demonstrating the proper form with the ease of someone who's done this thousands of times. Despite the physical pain radiating through his recovering body, Dante feels strange satisfaction when he finally fills the bucket successfully. It's a tangible achievement, real in a way his vanished life no longer feels. In the afternoon, Sienna takes him to their small vegetable garden behind the house. She talks about the plants like they're old friends, explaining their personalities and needs. This is cilantro. It's stubborn, but worth it. These are tomatoes, still green, but they'll be ready soon. And this is mint for Abuela's tea when her heart bothers her. Dante listens with fascination, realizing that this 12-year-old girl possesses wisdom that can't be learned from books or universities. He wonders if he has children somewhere, if he ever spent time teaching them anything meaningful, but his memory remains a locked vault. That evening, they gather around the small kitchen table for dinner. The television plays news in the background, and Dante's attention catches on a report about Chicago's crime families. Something about the images of Italian surnames and federal investigations tugs at his consciousness, but the connection remains frustratingly out of reach. Do you remember anything about your family? Luce asks, watching him closely over her plate of rice and beans. Only feelings. Fear, like I was running from something dark, Dante admits, lowering his gaze. The darkness is catching up. I can feel it even without remembering the details. Sometimes forgetting is a blessing, Luce says in a melancholic tone that suggests personal experience with painful memories. The past can be a burden heavier than poverty, Sienna interjects enthusiastically. But he must have people looking for him, someone who loves him, like the woman on the watch. The mention of the mysterious woman causes a shiver to run through Dante, a mixture of longing and visceral disgust he can't explain. Who is she? Why does her voice feel like poison? That night, a neighbor stops by to borrow sugar and sees Dante sitting at the table. The woman's eyes go wide, and she whispers something urgent to Luce before leaving quickly. After the door closes, Luce turns to Dante with a pale face. She says men in expensive suits have been asking questions in the next neighborhood over, looking for someone who went missing. Dante's heart stops. The abstract fear solidifies into concrete threat. Should I turn myself in? Maybe my family is looking for me. But even as he suggests it, every instinct screams that returning would mean death. If it was your family, they'd go to the police. Luce reasons with sharp logic. Rich men asking questions in alleys aren't looking to save you. They decide Dante must stay, hidden inside during daylight hours, avoiding windows, and keeping silent when visitors come. The forced confinement gives him time to observe the relationship between grandmother and granddaughter, the profound love that flows between them despite their circumstances. He watches how Sienna makes sure Luce takes her medications, and how Luce sacrifices her own portions to ensure Sienna eats enough. It's a wealth beyond measure, a loyalty and care that Dante suspects his previous life never contained. "You two are rich and don't even know it," he tells them one afternoon while helping Sienna wash dishes. "Rich people have swimming pools and cars, Dante. We have leaks in the roof," Sienna replies, laughing at the absurdity. But Dante shakes his head seriously. "You have something money can't buy. You have each other, genuinely and completely." Luce looks at him from her chair, and for the first time since he arrived, her expression softens into something approaching approval. "You're learning fast for a man who forgot everything, Dante. Maybe this amnesia is a gift." That night, Dante sleeps better, feeling less like an intruder and more like a temporary member of this unlikely family. But his dreams betray him, filled with fragmented images that feel like memories trying to break through. He sees a glass office overlooking Chicago's skyline, hears shouting in Italian, tastes something bitter in his mouth like poisoned wine. He wakes in a cold sweat with a name on his lips, Roman Volkov. The name brings no face, only a burning sensation of betrayal that sits like acid in his chest. He gets up quietly and goes to the small kitchen for water. Looking out at the window, at the dark, empty street, he knows his borrowed time is running out. The past is hunting him, bringing a storm that will test everyone he's come to care about. But for the first time since waking in that junkyard, he has something valuable to defend. At dawn, Dante offers to repair the leaking roof despite the risk of being seen outside. While hammering carefully, trying not to make too much noise, he hears voices on the street below. His blood turns to ice. Two men stand talking to a neighbor, their voices educated, but carrying an undertone of threat. "We're looking for someone. Tall, dark hair, probably injured. Might be wearing an expensive watch." Dante flattens himself against the roof, barely breathing, praying they don't look up. Sienna comes out to the backyard and, with astonishing presence of mind, begins singing a children's song at the top of her lungs. Her voice covers any sound Dante might make and signals him to stay completely still. The men eventually move on, their footsteps receding down the alley. When silence returns, Dante climbs down on shaking legs. Not fear for himself, but terror for what could happen to Sienna and Luce if these men find him here. "I have to go. I can't put you in danger anymore," he tells Luce urgently when he gets inside. "It's too late for that, hee-ho," Luce replies with infuriating calm. "If you run now, they'll catch you before you reach the corner. We stay quiet and wait for the danger to pass. Men like that don't see people like us. We're invisible to them, which is our protection." Dante marvels at her courage, forged through years of surviving impossible circumstances. That afternoon, the atmosphere in the house shifts dramatically. They're no longer just hosts and guests. They become accomplices in a dangerous secret, bound together against external threats. Dante shares what little he remembered from his nightmare: the office, the argument, the poisoned taste in his mouth. "Do you think someone tried to kill you on purpose?" Sienna asks, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "I'm certain of it now, and I think it was someone I trusted completely," Dante admits, the realization painful despite the missing details. The revelation draws them closer, creating invisible bonds stronger than blood or shared history. This strange family of circumstance has become something more. They've become each other's protectors in a world that wants to destroy them. Days turn into weeks, and an unusual routine establishes itself in the small house. Dante, whom neighbors now know as Luce's distant cousin, thanks to her quick thinking, transforms physically before their eyes. His pale skin darkens under the relentless sun, and his smooth hands develop the calluses of manual labor. Are you still with me? If this story is touching your heart, show some love with a like. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means everything. Dante works the garden with devotion that borders on religious, finding in the growing plants a metaphor for his own reconstruction. The physical labor has a meditative quality that calms the anxiety plaguing him every night. Sienna remains his constant teacher and companion, showing him how to navigate their world's economy. Look, Dante, copper wire is worth more if we strip the plastic first, she explains one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the ground surrounded by salvaged materials. He smiles at her practical intelligence and follows her instructions precisely. His relationship with Luz evolves from suspicious tolerance to mutual respect. She prepares home remedies for his muscle pain using herbs from the garden, and he repairs every broken thing in the house, discovering unexpected satisfaction in making her life slightly easier. But the threat of discovery remains constant, like storm clouds that refuse to disperse. Dante avoids main streets, always wearing the old baseball cap Sienna found for him to obscure his features. Sometimes temptation whispers that he should reclaim his previous life, seek answers and closure. But fear of losing this fragile peace stops him every time. Do you miss your other life? Sienna asks one day, while watering tomatoes that are finally turning red. You can't miss what you don't remember, Pequeña. But I miss the feeling of knowing who I am with certainty, Dante replies thoughtfully. One afternoon, while helping Luz shell peas, the elderly woman has a dizzy spell that alarms Dante deeply. She grabs the table to steady herself, her face going pale and her breathing shallow. Abuela, are you taking your medications? He asks, supporting her arm with genuine concern. They're too expensive, hijo. I'd rather we eat properly than waste money on pills, Luz admits with brutal honesty that makes Dante's chest tighten. He looks at the watch still on his wrist, worth thousands, but impossible to sell without attracting attention from whoever's hunting him. That night, he promises himself he'll find a way to help them without exposing their location. His connection with Sienna deepens daily. She tells him about her parents who abandoned her, and he makes up elaborate bedtime stories to chase away her nightmares. He's become the father figure she never had, and she's become the daughter he feels certain he failed somewhere in his forgotten life. When I get my life back, I'm buying you all the books in the world, he promises one evening. I'd rather you stay here and keep telling me stories yourself, Sienna replies. And her words leave Dante momentarily speechless. The love growing in this house is tangible, a shield against the misery pressing in from all sides. But the outside world has cruel ways of invading sanctuaries. One morning, Dante sees one of the suited men talking to the corner store owner, obviously asking questions. Recognition hits him like physical impact. He knows that sharp profile, that arrogant posture. The man works for someone Dante used to know, possibly used to be. The memory fragment is too brief to fully grasp, but the danger is immediate and real. He runs inside to alert Luz and Sienna, and they spend hours in darkness and silence, listening to footsteps approach and recede. The fear in Sienna's eyes ignites cold fury in Dante. He won't let anyone harm them, no matter what it costs him. I should leave, Luz. I'm painting a target on your backs, he whispers when the danger seems to pass. If you leave now, they kill you, and nobody ever knows what happened, she replies with unshakable firmness. Here we protect you, and you protect us. That's what family does. The word family hangs in the air between them, sealing a pact that transcends blood relation. Dante agrees to stay but begins planning, not for escape, but for defense and eventually, offense. He starts noting everything that comes back to him in an old notebook. Numbers, names, passwords that appear in his mind like lightning flashes. Caruso Enterprises, he writes one day, and the words trigger a blinding headache followed by certainty. That's my company. I own it, or owned it, he tells Sienna, showing her the page with trembling hands. Then you're not just rich. You're super rich, she says, eyes wide. No wonder you're terrible at gardening. You had people to do everything. They both laugh, nervous energy releasing some accumulated tension. However, Luz's health continues deteriorating despite Dante's efforts to improve her diet. A persistent cough plagues her at night, and he stays awake listening to her labored breathing, consumed with worry. He realizes time is running out, not just because of his pursuers, but because of the fragility of the woman who saved him. He decides he'll risk everything to get her proper medical care, regardless of the personal cost. One day, while collecting cardboard for sale, Sienna finds an old newspaper and rushes home to show Dante. On the business page is a photograph of an elegant woman with cold eyes standing next to a hard-faced man under the headline, Chicago's power couple mourns missing business partner. Dante stares at the image and feels violent nausea. That's them. My wife and my closest associate. His voice comes out dead, emotionless. Are they evil people? Sienna asks carefully. Worse than evil. They're traitors who wanted me erased, Dante says quietly. The revelation brings clarity mixed with rage. Now he knows who the enemy is and why they're searching for him. They don't want him to return home. They want to ensure he never surfaces to reclaim what's his. Dante looks at Sienna, so small and vulnerable, and makes a silent vow. He'll reclaim his power and position, not for wealth or revenge alone, but to protect her and Luz from the monsters now hunting him. We're going to prepare a surprise for them, he tells her with new determination, hardening his features. But before he can formulate any concrete plan, tragedy kicks down their door. Luz collapses in the kitchen while preparing breakfast, clutching her chest and falling heavily to the floor. Her cup shatters, coffee spreading across the worn linoleum like dark blood. Dante and Sienna reach her in seconds, shouting her name desperately, but she doesn't respond or open her eyes. Panic erases everything else, conspiracies and companies forgotten in the face of immediate crisis. In this moment, only Luz's life matters, hanging by a thread that threatens to snap. Dante scoops her into his arms with strength born from desperation, not caring who might see him on the street. Sienna runs beside him, crying and holding her grandmother's cold hand. Please, Abuela, please wake up, she begs through sobs. A taxi driver sees the emergency and stops, helping them load Luz's limp body into the back seat. During the ride to the hospital, Dante whispers promises to the unconscious woman. Hold on, Luz. Don't leave us alone. We need you. I need you. They burst through the emergency room doors, and Dante commands attention with an authority he didn't know he still possessed. The authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. Doctors take Luz away on a gurney, leaving Dante and Sienna alone in the sterile waiting room. The girl collapses into his arms, trembling with terror of losing the only family she's ever known. Dante wraps her tightly, feeling his own heart threatening to shatter. It's going to be okay, Pequeña. I promise you it's going to be okay, he says, though he has no idea if he can keep that promise. Night falls while they sit in plastic chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. Dante stares at the gold watch on his wrist, the object that's been his only connection to his identity, and makes a life-altering decision. He stands carefully to avoid waking Sienna and walks toward the hospital exit. He's going to turn that gold into life-saving money. The invisible bonds connecting him to this family have become unbreakable chains forged in love stronger than blood. The public hospital is chaos incarnate, filled with people, antiseptic smells, and sounds of suffering. Dante returns after an hour with his wrist bare and a stack of cash in his pocket. He sold his past to secure their future, getting a fair price at a 24-hour pawn shop through sheer force of will and negotiating skill that came back instinctively. Sienna wakes when he sits down and immediately notices the missing watch. "You sold it?" she asks in barely a whisper, understanding the magnitude of his sacrifice without need for explanation. "It was just an object, Sienna. Luce is worth more than all the gold in the world," Dante assures her, gently stroking her hair. At that moment, an exhausted doctor emerges looking for them. His expression is grave, making Dante's stomach clench with anticipatory dread. "Mrs. Ortiz is stable for now, but her heart is severely weakened. She needs surgery and medications that basic insurance doesn't cover fully." The doctor's words carry the implicit question that everything in America comes down to. "Can you pay?" Dante pulls out the money without hesitation, counting bills onto the desk. "Do whatever she needs. Here's the initial payment, and I'll get more if required." The doctor looks at the cash, then at Dante's worn clothes and rough appearance, clearly confused by the contradiction. "Very well. We'll prepare the operating room, but you should know surgery carries high risk at her age." Sienna lets out a choked sob, and Dante hugs her fiercely, trying to transfer strength he barely possesses. The following hours are torture measured by the tick-tock of wall clocks that seem to mock their anxiety. Dante uses the time to force his fragmented memories into some coherent narrative. He remembers Isabella, his wife, a woman of stunning beauty and calculated coldness. Remembers Roman Volkov, his second in command, a man he trusted like a brother. Remembers discovering them together in his office, their laughter cutting through him before he could understand why. Then the wine, the bitter taste, the room spinning, darkness, attempted murder disguised as loyalty. His mind also produces another face, younger and filled with teenage disappointment. Gia, his daughter, the memory of her last look before. Everything went dark, carries such pain that Dante physically gasps. He'd been a terrible father, absent and preoccupied with business and power. If he survives this, if he reclaims his life, he swears he'll fix that mistake. "If I get through this, I'm going to make everything right," he vows to himself while watching Sienna sleep against his shoulder. Luce's surgery lasts through the night and into dawn, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. When the surgeon finally emerges with news, Dante and Sienna jump to their feet. "She made it through. She's incredibly strong for her age," the doctor says with a tired smile. Sienna screams with joy and throws herself into Dante's arms. In that embrace, something in his mind finally breaks open completely. A smell, perhaps the hospital disinfectant, or a passing nurse's cheap perfume, triggers an avalanche of returning memory. He sees the meeting in perfect detail now, the boardroom, Roman pouring wine, Isabella's fake concern about his stress levels. He tastes the poison they fed him, hears their laughter as he collapsed. They'd driven him to the south side and dumped him in that junkyard to die like trash. The betrayal unfolds with brutal cinematic clarity, but along with the anger comes full remembrance of his identity. Dante Caruso, head of Chicago's most powerful crime family, a man who built an empire on fear and strategic violence. The amnesia lifts like fog before morning sun, leaving him exposed to harsh reality and his own dark history. "Dante, are you okay? You look pale," Sienna asks, noticing the change in his expression and posture. He looks at her, no longer with confused eyes, but with the intensity of someone who just remembered he's a king. "I remember everything now, Sienna. I know exactly who I am and what they did to me," he confesses in a voice that's gone from uncertain to commanding in seconds. The girl looks at him with mixture of awe and fear. "Are you leaving now that you know you're powerful?" Dante kneels to her level, taking her small hands in his calloused ones. "I'm leaving to take back what's mine, but not to become who I was before. I'm going to make sure you and Luce never want for anything again. That's my promise." Sienna nods, trusting him completely, even though part of her fears losing him to that world of wealth and violence she can't comprehend. They spend the next days at the hospital during Luce's recovery, and Dante uses the time to plan his return meticulously. He can't just appear randomly. He needs to do it in a way that protects him from another assassination attempt while ensuring justice for the betrayal. Using the hospital's payphone, he calls Vincent Russo, an old family attorney who'd been sidelined by Roman after the coup. The voice on the other end trembles with shock upon hearing him. "Mr. Caruso, everyone believes you're dead. Your funeral was 3 weeks ago." Dante gives precise instructions, demanding absolute discretion and preparation of all necessary legal documents to retake control of his organization. "And Vincent, I need you to set up trust funds and protections for 2 people, Luz Ortiz and Sienna Ortiz. They saved my life, and I'm making them untouchable." He feels like he's playing chess, where his life is the king, and his adoptive family are pieces he must protect at all costs. When Luz is finally discharged, Dante takes them home, in a taxi he pays for, with the last of the pawnshop money. The elderly woman looks at him curiously during the ride, noting the change in his bearing, the confidence radiating from him now. "You know who you are now, don't you, Hijo?" she says when they settle her into bed at home. "Yes, Luz, and I'm sorry for the danger I brought, but I'm going to fix everything," Dante promises. She smiles weakly, tired but satisfied. "You didn't bring danger. You brought life to this old house when we needed it most." That night, Dante must say goodbye temporarily, explaining he needs to face his demons alone before he can truly be free. Sienna cries, clinging to his waist, and he has to fight his own tears. "I'll come back. You have my word of honor, and a Caruso never breaks his word," he says, giving her a small medal he's worn around his neck since childhood. He leaves the house under cover of darkness, transformed back into Dante Caruso, but carrying the heart of the man from the junkyard. He walks toward downtown Chicago, each step a declaration of war against those who tried to erase him. His greatest fear isn't confronting Roman and Isabella. It's facing his daughter Gia's reaction. Will she believe the lies they've been feeding her? The uncertainty gnaws at him worse than any physical pain. He arrives at Vincent's office at dawn, where he cleans up and dresses in borrowed clothes that are slightly large but restore his dignity. Looking in the mirror, Dante sees a different man. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but a humanity in his gaze that didn't exist before. He's ready for what comes next. He gets into the car Vincent prepared and drives toward the Caruso mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast, the place he once called home and now sees as a battlefield. The echoes of his forgotten life have stopped being whispers and become a roar demanding justice. "I'm getting emotional over here. If you're feeling this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And hit that subscribe button, because this is about to get intense." The Caruso mansion stands imposing against the Chicago skyline, oblivious to the reckoning about to unfold inside its walls. Dante observes the facade from the car, noting that the grounds are perfectly maintained as if nothing happened, preserving the illusion of order and power. He takes a deep breath, gathering courage he didn't know he still possessed, and exits the vehicle. The security guard nearly drops his weapon upon seeing him, face going white with shock. "Open the gate," Dante commands, with his old authority, and the gate swings open slowly, as if the house itself recognizes its rightful master. He walks toward the main entrance, feeling adrenaline flood his system. Upon entering, he hears laughter from the main living room. It's Roman and Isabella, toasting with champagne in mid-morning. The scene turns his stomach, traitors celebrating over his empty grave. He enters the room unannounced, and the silence that follows is absolute and terrifying. Isabella drops her glass, crystal shattering against marble floor, and Roman turns the color of a corpse. "Surprised to see me?" Dante asks with icy calm, enjoying the terror flooding their faces. "Dante, my God, you're alive!" Isabella stammers, trying to compose herself into the concerned wife act. But fear betrays her completely. "Save the performance, Isabella. I remember everything now." He cuts her off with brutal efficiency. Roman attempts to approach, with hands raised in false peace. "Brother, you don't understand how much we searched for you. We were desperate, thinking you were dead." Dante releases a bitter laugh that contains no humor. "You searched to make sure I stayed dead, I assume, to confirm the job was finished." The confrontation escalates verbally and violently. Dante lists every detail of their betrayal with prosecutorial precision, dismantling their lies methodically. He informs them that his attorneys are already freezing all accounts, and the FBI is investigating attempted murder and racketeering charges. Isabella begins crying real tears for the first time, watching her world of luxury crumble into dust, while Roman looks for escape routes like a cornered rat. But what matters most to Dante isn't in this room. "Where is Gia?" he demands to know, voice hardening. "She's in her room. Don't drag her into this nightmare," Isabella pleads desperately. Dante ignores her and takes the stairs 2 at a time, following memory to his daughter's bedroom. He opens the door and finds her sitting at her desk with headphones on, studying, oblivious to the chaos unfolding downstairs. When she sees him, the 15-year-old girl removes her headphones and freezes completely. "Dad?" she whispers, and in her eyes Dante sees the doubt and confusion they've been planting. "Mom said you went crazy and ran away from us." Dante sits on the edge of her bed, maintaining a respectful distance and fighting the urge to embrace her immediately. "Your mother and Roman lied to you about everything, Gia. But I'm not here to speak badly of them. I'm here to tell you the truth you deserve." He tells her his story, omitting the most violent details to protect her, but being completely honest about his disappearance and the people who saved his life. Gia listens carefully, processing the information, seeing the scars on her father's now calloused hands and the sincerity burning in his eyes. "These people, the girl and grandmother, they helped you without wanting anything back?" she asks incredulously, struggling to understand such selflessness. "They gave me life when I had nothing to offer them, mija. They taught me what it means to be real family, not just sharing a name and house," Dante replies with raw emotion. The girl begins crying and suddenly hugs her father, breaking through years of coldness and distance that had built between them. In that embrace, Dante feels he's recovered the most important thing he'd lost, more valuable than money or power. They descend the stairs together, hand in hand, just as federal agents arrive to take Roman into custody. He shouts empty threats while being handcuffed, his arrogance finally cracking to reveal the coward underneath. Isabella remains seated on the sofa, completely defeated, watching as husband and daughter look at her with disappointment and disgust. "Leave my house, Isabella. My lawyers will contact you. I'll give you what's legally fair, but I never want to see you here again," Dante tells her with cold finality. The woman, stripped of all arrogance and pretense, leaves the mansion with her head down, facing consequences for the first time in her privileged life. The house falls into cleansing silence, the kind that comes after a storm passes and leaves clarity in its wake. That same afternoon, Dante takes Gia to the kitchen and prepares something simple himself, rejecting offers of help from household staff. He wants to serve his daughter personally, care for her as he learned to do with Sienna. "Can I meet them?" Gia asks suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Sienna and Luz, I mean." Dante smiles, feeling immense pride at her request. "Of course, but you'll have to leave your designer shoes here. We're going to a place where you walk on dirt, and it's more real than anywhere you've been." The trip to the South Side is a cultural shock for Gia, who stares out the window with mixture of curiosity and horror at the poverty surrounding them. When they arrive at Luz's house, the girl and elderly woman are working in the garden. Sienna sees the car and runs toward it, squealing with joy when Dante emerges. He lifts her in his arms and spins her around. "You kept your promise. You came back," she shouts happily. Dante sets her down and makes introductions carefully. "Sienna, this is Gia, my daughter. Gia, this is Sienna, my other daughter." The meeting is awkward at first, both girls uncertain how to interact. Gia feels out of place in her expensive clothes, and Sienna observes her with frank curiosity mixed with defensiveness. "Are you rich?" Sienna asks with characteristic directness, no filter between thought and speech. Gia blushes, suddenly ashamed of her privilege. "I guess so. Yes." Sienna nods thoughtfully. "That doesn't matter, really. What's important is whether you're kind and fun to be around." Her simplicity breaks the ice instantly, and soon the two girls are sitting on the ground talking about their vastly different, but now intertwined lives. Luz watches the scene from her chair with a satisfied smile creasing her weathered face. Dante sits beside her and takes her hand gently. "Thank you for giving me back my daughter, Luz. You gave me back everything that matters." "You saved yourself, Dante. You just needed a push in the right direction," she replies with characteristic wisdom. Dinner that night is a strange celebration, a fusion of worlds. They eat pizza Dante had delivered alongside Luz's homemade beans, celebrating the union of an improbable family. Dante knows the road ahead won't be easy. He must rebuild his organization, deal with divorce proceedings, heal Gia's emotional wounds, and integrate these two worlds properly. But watching his daughter laugh genuinely with Sienna, he knows he has the strength required for the challenges ahead. He's paid a high price for truth, losing his innocence and blind trust in the process. But he's gained clear vision of what genuinely matters in life, and that truth is beyond any monetary value. Integrating Gia into Sienna's world isn't an instant fairy tale. It's a gradual process filled with cultural clashes and painful growth. The first time Gia tries to use the outdoor bathroom at Luz's house, she emerges pale and almost crying, which prompts a poorly suppressed giggle from Sienna. Dante has to intervene gently, explaining to his biological daughter that comfort isn't universal, but a privilege she's taken for granted. "There isn't always running water here, Gia. We have to conserve and appreciate every drop," he says, when she leaves the faucet running too long. Meanwhile, when Sienna visits the mansion one weekend, she feels overwhelmed by the space and eerie silence. "Why do you need so many rooms when it's just two people living here?" she asks, while wandering the empty hallways that echo. "For space and privacy," Gia replies, then realizes how absurd and wasteful that sounds. Sienna feels profoundly alone in that immense house, missing the warmth and constant noise of her neighborhood. However, the swimming pool becomes their great equalizer and meeting point. There in the water, all social differences dissolve, and they're simply two girls playing and laughing together. Wait until you see what happens next. This story is far from over, and the best parts are still coming. Don't go anywhere. School becomes another source of conflict and growth. Gia, who attends an elite private academy, begins helping Sienna with homework from her underfunded public school. She's horrified by the worn textbooks and lower academic standards, and passionately demands her father take action. "She's brilliant, Dad. She's bored and not being challenged at that school at all," Gia argues fiercely. Dante, proud of his daughter's advocacy, decides to fund a full scholarship for Sienna at a better private school. Luz opposes this at first out of stubborn pride. "It's not charity, Luz. It's justice and investment," Dante tells her firmly. "Sienna has exceptional gifts, and it's our responsibility to nurture them properly." Finally, the grandmother accepts, and Sienna starts attending the same private academy, where she immediately faces rejection from some entitled classmates. Gia becomes her fierce protector, confronting her own former friends. "If you have a problem with her, you have a problem with me. Choose wisely," Gia declares publicly in the cafeteria, sealing her loyalty and losing some superficial friendships in the process. Meanwhile, Dante struggles to clean his organization of the corruption Roman had introduced. He discovers his former second-in-command had been laundering money through shell corporations, and the financial situation is precarious. He's forced to restructure everything, lay off people, work brutal hours that leave him exhausted. But unlike his previous life, now he comes home, sometimes to the mansion, sometimes to Luz's house, and disconnects completely to have dinner with his family. He's learned that business success means nothing if you return to an empty house with no one who truly cares. One day, Gia arrives at Luz's house with a bag of designer clothes she's outgrown. "Here, so you can look pretty like me," she tells Sienna with good intentions, but terrible execution and lack of tact. Sienna looks at the expensive clothes, then at Gia with raised eyebrows. "Thanks, but I don't need to dress like you to be pretty, and these clothes aren't practical for playing in dirt and climbing trees." Gia feels hurt and rejected, not understanding the lesson being taught. Luz intervenes with characteristic wisdom. "Child, gifts should please the receiver, not the giver's ego." That afternoon, Sienna teaches Gia to make dolls from scraps of old fabric and buttons. Initially, Gia looks at the humble materials with barely concealed disdain, but soon she's completely immersed in the creativity of making something with her own hands. When they finish, Gia stares at her crooked, imperfect doll with more pride than any expensive toy ever gave her. "I made this myself, with my own hands," she says, smiling genuinely. "See? That has more value than anything bought in a store," Sienna points out. It's an epiphany moment for the wealthy teenager, understanding for the first time the value of effort and personal creation. The bond between the sisters deepens significantly when Gia experiences her first heartbreak. A boy from her school rejects her cruelly, and she takes refuge at Luz's house, crying inconsolably on the worn sofa. Sienna, who's never had a boyfriend or romantic interest, listens carefully and offers practical, brutally direct advice. "If he doesn't want you, he's an idiot, and you don't waste time on idiots. Simple," she says while offering sweetbread. Gia laughs through her tears, realizing that Sienna's honest approach is the best medicine for her wounded pride. Dante observes these exchanges with a full heart, watching his two worlds weave together into something new and beautiful. He invites Luz to a formal dinner at the mansion, sending a car specifically for her. The elderly woman arrives in her best dress, simple and clean, and sits at the head of the table with a natural dignity that no society woman could match or fake. She treats the household staff with respect that shames Gia for her past entitled attitudes, teaching another profound lesson without speaking a single word. However, not everything is perfect harmony. Isabella, now living in a small apartment and working as a sales clerk, begins calling Gia constantly and crying, blaming Dante for all her misfortune and loss. Gia feels divided and guilty for enjoying her new life, while her mother suffers consequences. "You should see her at least once," Sienna surprisingly advises when Gia confides in her. "Why, she was horrible to your dad and tried to kill him," Gia says, confused by the suggestion. "Because she's your mother, and everyone deserves a second chance if they genuinely want to change and grow," the wise 12-year-old replies. Gia decides to visit her mother, finding Isabella in a deplorable state, surrounded by unpacked boxes and drowning in bitterness. The confrontation is difficult and emotionally raw. Gia tells her mother she can't keep blaming others and must take responsibility for her choices. Isabella, struck by her daughter's unexpected maturity, realizes she's lost all control and influence over her. It becomes the starting point of genuine change for Isabella, driven by shame and the desperate desire to regain her daughter's respect. The chapter closes with a shared birthday celebration. Sienna turns 13 and Gia turns 16 on the same weekend. Dante organizes a party in the mansion's garden, but with home-cooked food prepared by Luz and traditional games from Sienna's neighborhood. Seeing Gia's wealthy friends breaking a piñata alongside Sienna's scrappy neighborhood friends is the final proof that the walls between worlds have fallen. Two worlds collided violently, yes, but instead of destroying each other, they fused to create something stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more valuable. Mary's redemption arc unfolds slowly but surely. She takes a job Dante offers at the lowest level of his organization, doing data entry and filing. At first, other employees whisper about the boss's ex-wife working in the basement, but Mary keeps her head down and works harder than anyone. She discovers she's good at organization and pattern recognition, skills she'd wasted on planning society parties. Within 6 months, she's promoted to operations coordinator, earning the position through merit, not connections. Dante watches her transformation with cautious respect, finally able to forgive her completely for Gia's sake. The years pass like autumn leaves carried by wind. Luz's small house has seen incredible transformations. Now it has a new roof, polished concrete floors, and an extra room Dante insisted on building. But the home's essential character remains intact, warm and welcoming. Sienna, now in college, studies medicine with the same passion she once had for finding treasures in trash. Her dream of healing her community is materializing through hard work and the unconditional support of her unusual family. Gia graduated in social work and works alongside Dante's charitable foundation, designing programs for at-risk youth. The two sisters, united not by blood but by destiny and choice, are inseparable, sharing everything. Dante, with completely white hair now, looks at them with the pride of someone who cultivated the world's most beautiful garden from scorched earth. However, time is generous with wisdom, but cruel with health. Lutz, the iron matriarch who survived everything, begins fading slowly. Her steps shorten, breathing becomes more labored, hands tremble holding coffee cups. Sienna, with her medical knowledge, knows her grandmother's heart is reaching its natural limit. She tries every treatment, consults her professors, but old age is a disease with no cure, only dignified management. The house becomes a peaceful sanctuary for Luz in her final months. Isabella, Dante, Gia, and Sienna take turns caring for her, returning every ounce of love she gave them over the years. Isabella reads novels to her in afternoons. Gia shows her building plans for youth centers, and Dante simply sits beside her, holding her hand in silent gratitude. Luz never complains, facing the end with the same courage she faced poverty and every other hardship. "Don't cry for me when I'm gone," she tells them one night when they're all gathered around her bed. "I've had a rich life, full of people who genuinely love me. What more can an old woman ask from this world?" Sienna fights desperately to hold back tears, feeling like part of her soul is being torn away. "Don't go yet, abuela. You have to see me graduate medical school." Luz caresses her cheek with infinite tenderness. "I'll see you, mi niña, from the best seat in heaven." Sienna's graduation day arrives, and Luz, against all medical advice and odds, insists on attending. Dante arranges a private medical transport with a nurse to accompany her to the auditorium. When Sienna walks across the stage to receive her degree with highest honors, she looks for Luz in the front row. The elderly woman, weak but absolutely radiant, raises her hand in a victory sign. It's the pinnacle of her entire life, seeing the junkyard girl become a doctor who will save lives. 2 weeks after graduation, Luz calls the family for one final dinner together. She requests all her favorite dishes and, drawing strength from deep reserves, sits at the table with them. They laugh, sharing memories. The day Dante didn't know how to use the outdoor toilet. Isabella's first time washing dishes by hand. Gia and Sienna's childhood arguments. It's a farewell perfectly disguised as celebration, filled with love and bittersweet nostalgia. Luz looks at each person, etching their faces into her eternal memory. That same night, Luz passes away peacefully in her sleep with a gentle smile on her face. Sienna discovers her in the morning, and though the pain is absolutely heartbreaking, she feels profound peace, knowing her grandmother departed without suffering. The funeral is massive and remarkable. People from the entire South Side neighborhood and Chicago's high society come together to say goodbye to the woman who united two impossible worlds. There's no class distinction in the collective grief. Everyone mourns the same mother, the same teacher, the same light. Dante ensures her grave is the most beautiful in the cemetery, always covered with fresh flowers from the garden she loved and tended. "She saved my life," Dante says in his eulogy, voice breaking. Not just my physical body, but my soul and humanity. Isabella speaks too, thanking the woman who taught her the dignity of honest work and genuine humility. But it's Sienna who closes the ceremony with words that leave no dry eyes. My grandmother didn't leave me a monetary inheritance. She left me an inheritance of unconditional love that never runs out, wisdom that guides every decision, and the understanding that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts. The grieving process is slow and painful, but the family stays tightly united, supporting each other exactly as Luz taught them. Did this story touch your heart? If it did, please show some love. Like, comment, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to remember what really matters in this world. Your support means everything to this channel. The house feels empty without Luz's presence, but her spirit lives in every corner. In the coffee smell that fills the kitchen each morning, in the garden plants that continue growing, in the family's unbreakable bond. They decide unanimously not to sell the house, but instead transform it into a free medical clinic run by Sienna, fulfilling the dream of serving the community that raised her. Life continues its relentless forward motion, as it always does. Sienna meets Marco, an idealistic doctor who shares her passion for serving underserved populations. They fall in love between hospital shifts and volunteer clinics. When Marco proposes, he does it in Luz's garden, under the lemon tree she planted decades ago. Sienna accepts immediately, knowing her grandmother would have absolutely approved of this good, humble, dedicated man. Dante, watching his adoptive daughter find happiness, feels his life's mission is finally complete. He's closed the circle, transformed from a lost man thrown in trash to the patriarch of an extraordinary, unconventional family. He looks at the sky regularly and winks, imagining Luz up there organizing heaven and scolding angels for not keeping things clean enough. The cycle of life turns inexorably, bringing death, but also the promise of new life and continuation. Sienna and Marco's wedding becomes the event of the year in their community, not for luxury, but for overflowing joy and love. It's held in the garden of Luz's old house, now the Luz Ortiz Memorial Clinic. String lights hang from trees, long tables where doctors, social workers, former gang members, and Dante's business associates mix freely. It's a living mosaic of humanity, exactly as Luz would have wanted and demanded. Dante walks Sienna down the aisle, both with tears streaming down their faces. "You look absolutely beautiful, daughter," he says with a broken voice full of pride. "Thanks, Dad," she replies, and that word spoken so naturally remains the best gift Dante has ever received in his entire complicated life. Isabella and Gia sit in the front row, crying with genuine emotion, dressed elegantly but without ostentation or designer labels. The ceremony is beautifully simple, focused on the couple's commitment to serve the world together and love each other through every hardship. During the reception, Dante takes the microphone for his toast, and the crowd falls silent. Many years ago, I arrived at this neighborhood broken, without memory, left for dead in a junkyard. A brave girl and her incredible grandmother picked me up, cleaned my wounds, and fixed everything that was truly broken inside me. Today, I watched that girl become a woman and a wife, and I realized the real treasure was never what I had in the bank. The real treasure was what I found in that South Side junkyard when I had nothing. The applause echoes into the night, and Sienna runs to embrace him tightly, both crying and laughing simultaneously. It's a perfect moment of pure happiness, frozen forever in time and memory. Shortly after the wedding, Sienna announces she's pregnant with her first child. The news is received with absolute jubilation throughout the extended family. Dante, who already feels like a grandfather to the children Gia plans to have soon, is absolutely thrilled by the prospect. "I'm going to spoil that baby terribly and teach them everything their mother taught me," he jokes with mock seriousness. Isabella is already knitting baby clothes, a domestic skill she perfected over years of genuine humility. The family prepares eagerly to welcome the next generation, excited to pass on their incredible story of redemption and unconditional love. The day the baby is born, a healthy, strong girl with her mother's dark eyes, they unanimously decide to name her Luz Rosa in honor of the great-grandmother who started everything. When Dante holds little Luz Rosa in his arms for the first time, he feels the overwhelming weight of continuity and legacy. He whispers in her tiny ear the story of how her grandfather was found discarded in trash, and how love, courage, and compassion rescued him completely. The baby looks at him with big, curious, impossibly wise eyes, as if understanding every single word. The Luz Ortiz Memorial Clinic prospers and expands under Sienna and Marco's passionate direction, becoming a beacon of hope for the entire South Side. It offers quality medical care to those who can't afford it otherwise, breaking cycles of poverty through health and education. Gia designs a modern, functional expansion using sustainable materials, and Isabella organizes highly successful fundraising events, using her old society connections for genuine good. Everyone contributes their unique talents to keep the legacy of generosity and service alive and growing. Dante spends his afternoons there regularly, telling stories to children in the waiting room, becoming the neighborhood's beloved storytelling grandfather. One day, several years later, Dante strolls with his granddaughter, Luz Rosa, now 5 years old, near the place where his old life ended. The junkyard has been completely closed and transformed into a beautiful green park through Dante's company's environmental efforts and community investment. "Was it really here, Abuelo?" the girl asked with wide eyes, pointing to a grassy mound where trash once towered. "It was exactly here, mi amor. Right here is where my old life ended completely, and my real life started again from nothing," Dante replies, squeezing her small hand. The girl looks up at him with profound wisdom beyond her years. "You were very lucky, Abuelo." "Yes, Luz Rosa. I was incredibly lucky to lose absolutely everything, so I could find the only things that actually mattered," he says softly. They sit together on a park bench, watching the sun set over Chicago's skyline, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet. Dante thinks briefly of Roman, who died alone in federal prison, and Isabella, who finally found peace in honest work and service. Life had put everyone exactly where they belonged. He's surrounded by love, purpose, and genuine peace. The family gathers every Sunday at the clinic for meals together. The table is always completely full, noisy, and wonderfully chaotic, with plates passing hand to hand and laughter shaking the windows. It's an imperfect family, beautifully patched together, sewn with threads of different colors and textures, but absolutely indestructible. They've learned together that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property, but in the number of hands that reach out to hold you when you fall. On the clinic's main wall hangs a large photograph of Luz, smiling with that knowing, mischievous look she always had. Below it, a gold plaque reads, "Here we cure bodies, but we heal souls with unconditional love." Dante looks at the photo regularly, raises whatever he's drinking to her in silent toast, and smiles. He kept his sacred promise. He protected his true family, learned to love without conditions, and left a legacy that will endure far beyond his own life. Sienna approaches and puts her arm around his shoulders affectionately. "What are you thinking about, old man?" she asks with teasing warmth. "That I'm the richest man in the entire world, Doctor," Dante replies with absolute certainty. And as the sun finishes setting, giving way to countless stars emerging above the city, Dante knows with complete conviction that his story is true and complete. The tale of the Mafia boss and the junkyard girl isn't a fairy tale or fantasy. It's a profound lesson in humanity, redemption, and the transformative power of unconditional love that will continue resonating in the hearts of everyone who hears it, forever and always. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to know. Please rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments, support us with a like, and subscribe to our channel. Comment telling us where you're watching from. Thanks for your unconditional support with every story. Blessings to you and your family.